My daughter's nanny switched to Mandarin with her sister, and I understood their plan to kidnap my daughter and demand ransom money. Maylin answered her phone in the kitchen and immediately said in Mandarin, "We take the girl next Thursday when the mother has her all-day conference downtown. She'll be gone from 7 in the morning until at least 6 at night." I was sitting in my home office 15 feet away with the door open, reviewing quarterly reports for Whitmore Investments where I served as senior partner, and I froze with my pen hovering over the page. My 4-year-old daughter Emma was eating lunch at the kitchen table, humming to herself while Maylin paced near the window. Maylin's sister Wei was on speakerphone, her voice tinny but clear, asking about security systems and escape routes. Maylin explained that our alarm was rarely set during the day, that I worked from home but took long conference calls with my office door closed, that my ex-husband lived in California and only saw Emma twice a year. She described Emma's routine in precise detail: the afternoon snack at 2, the nap schedule, the fact that Emma was small for her age and easy to carry. Wei asked how much ransom they should demand, and Maylin said at least 2 million, maybe 3, because I was a partner managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions and could access liquid cash quickly through my firm. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my pen and it clattered onto my desk. I'd grown up in Shanghai until I was 12, spoke Mandarin fluently at home with my mother who'd immigrated and never fully mastered English. But after marrying my white ex-husband and taking his surname, most people assumed I was just another American professional who'd adopted an Asian child. My appearance was ambiguous enough that Maylin had never suspected I understood every word of her native language. She'd been working for us for 8 months, came with impeccable references from an agency that supposedly vetted all their candidates thoroughly, had seemed loving and patient with Emma, had celebrated Emma's birthday with homemade dumplings and taught her to count to 10 in Mandarin. I'd trusted her completely, let her into our home and our lives, given her keys and alarm codes and detailed schedules of my movements. Now she was casually planning to kidnap my daughter, discussing it with the same tone someone might use to plan a dinner party. Wei was asking logistical questions about how to keep Emma quiet and compliant, and Maylin said she'd give her children sedatives, the kind used for long flights, that Emma trusted her completely and wouldn't resist or scream. I forced myself to breathe slowly and stay silent, knowing that revealing I understood would escalate the situation unpredictably and put Emma in immediate danger. Maylin continued describing their plan with chilling detail. She'd take Emma to Wei's apartment across the state line, a place I'd never been and couldn't trace. They'd send me ransom demands through untraceable communication methods Wei had researched, probably cryptocurrency transactions that couldn't be tracked by authorities. Maylin said she knew my schedule for the next 2 weeks because I'd given it to her so she could plan Emma's activities around my meetings. Next Thursday was perfect because I had an all-day conference at the Hilton downtown, a big annual event for wealth management professionals that I'd mentioned multiple times. I'd be unreachable for hours in presentations and networking sessions. By the time I discovered Emma was missing, they'd have a 6-hour head start and could be anywhere. Wei asked what would stop me from calling the police immediately, and Maylin said they'd threaten to hurt Emma if I involved authorities, that most parents prioritize their child's safety over legal procedures, especially wealthy parents who could afford to pay ransoms without financial hardship. The casual cruelty in her voice made my stomach turn. This was the woman who'd been caring for my daughter, who Emma called Auntie May, who I'd welcomed into our home and paid generously because I believed good childcare was worth investing in. Maylin had spent 8 months studying our lives, gathering intelligence, planning this kidnapping with the patience of someone executing a long-term business strategy. Wei asked if I'd be suspicious if Maylin suddenly quit before the planned kidnapping date, and Maylin said no, that I was too busy with work to pay close attention, that I'd probably just scramble to find replacement childcare and be grateful for 2 weeks' notice. She said American professional women were easy targets because they were consumed by their careers and outsourced parenting to hired help, trusted nannies implicitly because they needed to believe their children were safe while they worked. The contempt in her voice was clear and shocking. I'd treated Maylin with nothing but respect, paid her above market rate, given her holiday bonuses and paid time off, accommodated her schedule when she needed flexibility, and she'd been calculating how to destroy my life and traumatize my daughter. Wei asked about the specific amount Maylin thought they could extract, and Maylin said she'd seen my bank statements and investment account information when she'd been cleaning my home office and found papers on my desk. She knew exactly how much money I had access to, knew my net worth was over 8 million with another 12 million in retirement accounts and trusts. She said 2 million was a conservative starting point, but they could negotiate higher once I was desperate and terrified. Wei laughed and said this was better than working minimum wage jobs for the rest of their lives, that one successful kidnapping could set them up permanently if they were smart about hiding the money. Maylin agreed and said they just needed to be patient for 1 more week, keep everything normal, not raise any suspicions. She told Wei she had to go because Emma was finishing lunch and needed to be put down for her nap. They ended the call with a cheerful goodbye in Mandarin, and Maylin immediately switched to English, her voice bright and warm as she told Emma it was time to wash hands and brush teeth before nap time. I sat at my desk trying to process what I'd just heard while my mind raced through possible responses. I could confront Maylin immediately, but that might provoke her to act unpredictably or accelerate their timeline. I could call the police, but what evidence did I have beyond my testimony about a conversation she could deny? Recording laws in our state required 2-party consent, So even if I'd recorded the call, it might not be admissible. I needed to be strategic and careful, couldn't let emotion override tactical thinking. Emma's safety was the absolute priority. I heard Mei Lin walking Emma upstairs to her bedroom, heard the familiar routine of storytime and tucking in, heard Emma's sleepy voice asking for one more book. Mei Lin sounded so normal, so caring, exactly like the devoted nanny I'd believed her to be. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. How did someone plan to kidnap a child they cared for daily? How did they sing lullabies and read bedtime stories to a victim they intended to drug and terrorize? I felt physically sick thinking about the psychology required to execute that level of deception. I waited until I heard Mei Lin come back downstairs and start cleaning up the kitchen. Then I quietly pulled out my phone and called my attorney, a sharp woman named Victoria Lang who specialized in family law but had connections throughout the legal system. I stepped into my walk-in closet and closed the door, speaking in barely a whisper. Victoria answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation in rapid clinical sentences, keeping emotion out of my voice because breaking down wouldn't help Emma. Victoria listened without interrupting and then said we needed to involve law enforcement immediately, that kidnapping conspiracy was a serious felony and police would take the threat seriously even without physical evidence of preparation. She said my testimony as a fluent Mandarin speaker who'd overheard the planning conversation would be credible, especially if we could corroborate details like Wei's phone number and address. She told me not to confront Mei Lin under any circumstances, to act completely normal, to give police time to investigate and build a case. Victoria said she'd call a contact at the FBI who specialized in kidnapping cases and get them involved immediately, since the plan involved crossing state lines. I thanked Victoria and hung up, then forced myself to walk downstairs and act like nothing was wrong. Mei Lin was loading the dishwasher, humming the same Chinese lullaby she'd just sung to Emma. She looked up when I entered the kitchen and smiled, asking if I wanted tea. I said yes and watched her move through my kitchen with easy familiarity, knowing where every cup and plate belonged, comfortable in a space she'd occupied for 8 months. She'd become part of our daily life, someone Emma looked forward to seeing every morning, someone I'd relied on to keep my daughter safe and happy while I managed my demanding career. The betrayal felt visceral and personal, but I kept my expression neutral and made small talk about Emma's lunch and afternoon schedule. Mei Lin said Emma had eaten well and was napping peacefully, that she'd planned some art projects for when Emma woke up. She asked about my workday and I said it was busy as always, quarterly reviews were demanding and I'd be tied up with conference calls most of the afternoon. Mei Lin nodded sympathetically and said she'd keep Emma quiet so I could focus. The normalcy of the conversation was surreal and horrifying. Victoria called back 20 minutes later while I was back in my office. She'd spoken with FBI Special Agent Derek Williams, who handled kidnapping investigations in our region. Agent Williams wanted to meet with me immediately, today if possible, to get my statement and start building a case. Victoria said she'd accompany me to the meeting and that we should go now while Mei Lin was occupied with Emma's care. I agreed and told Mei Lin I had to run out for a quick meeting at a client's office, that I'd be back in about 2 hours. Mei Lin said that was fine. Emma would nap for at least another hour and then they'd do activities in the playroom. I grabbed my purse and keys and drove to the FBI field office 20 minutes across town, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel the entire way. Victoria met me in the parking lot and we went through security together, showed identification, went through metal detectors. Agent Williams was in his late 40s with graying hair and the intense focus of someone who'd worked kidnapping cases long enough to take every threat seriously. His partner, Agent Lisa Nakamura, specialized in international crime and human trafficking. They took us to a conference room and I told them everything. I described the phone call between Mei Lin and Wei in exhaustive detail, translating their Mandarin conversation word for word, explaining the specific plans they'd discussed for next Thursday's kidnapping. Agent Williams took notes while Agent Nakamura recorded the interview, asking clarifying questions about timeline and logistics. I gave them Mei Lin's full name, her home address that I had from employment records, her phone number, the name of the agency that had placed her with our family. I explained my background, my fluency in Mandarin from growing up in Shanghai, the fact that Mei Lin had no idea I understood her native language. Agent Nakamura asked if I had any documentation of the conversation and I said no, that I hadn't been recording and our state required 2-party consent for call recordings anyway. But I could provide testimony under oath about everything I'd heard. Victoria interjected that my testimony was credible and corroborated by my language skills, which could be independently verified, and by the specific details I could provide about Wei's phone number and the planned date of the kidnapping. Agent Williams said they'd need to move quickly because the conspirators had already selected a date just 6 days away, which meant they were in active preparation phase rather than just discussing hypothetical crimes. Agent Williams explained their strategy. They'd immediately begin surveillance on Mei Lin and run background checks on both her and Wei. They'd trace Wei's phone number and location, identify her address, and start building profiles on both women, including immigration status, criminal history, and financial records. They'd coordinate with local police to have units ready to move when the kidnapping attempt occurred, but they wanted to catch both women in the act of executing the plan so charges would stick definitively. Agent Nakamura said letting the plan proceed to the point of actual kidnapping was risky, but arresting Mei Lin now based only on a conversation would give her the opportunity to claim misunderstanding or mistranslation, and Wei could disappear entirely. If we let them attempt the kidnapping with full law enforcement preparation and protection, they'd have indisputable evidence of conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and potentially other charges like drugging a minor if they caught Mei Lin with sedatives. Victoria objected strongly, saying the risk to Emma was unacceptable, that I couldn't allow my daughter to be used as bait in a law enforcement operation. Agent Williams acknowledged the concern but explained they'd have agents positioned to intervene before Emma was ever in danger, that the goal was to let Mei Lin take Emma only as far as the front door before arresting both women simultaneously. I felt torn between trusting law enforcement expertise and my maternal instinct to remove Emma from Mei Lin's care immediately. Agent Nakamura seemed to sense my hesitation and explained that if we fired Mei Lin now, or had her arrested on conspiracy charges before she acted, we'd never know if there were other accomplices beyond Wei, never fully dismantle whatever network they were part of. She said Chinese-language kidnapping rings had been operating in wealthy American communities for years, targeting families with Asian heritage and significant assets, using domestic workers as inside sources. This case could help them identify and prosecute a larger criminal operation if we had patience and courage. I asked what would happen if something went wrong, if their timing was off or Mei Lin deviated from the plan. Agent Williams said they'd have at least 6 agents positioned around my house next Thursday, that they'd have my phone tapped to hear any ransom demands in real time, that Emma would never be out of their sight. He said he understood this was my daughter and I had every right to refuse their strategy, but he believed it was the safest path to ensuring Mei Lin and Wei and anyone else involved faced serious prison time, rather than getting away with conspiracy charges they might plea down to lesser offenses. Victoria told me the decision was mine, that she'd support whatever I chose, but she wanted me to understand the legal ramifications of each option. If I fired Mei Lin tonight, she'd know something was wrong and could warn Wei, and both women would disappear before charges could be filed. If I had Mei Lin arrested immediately based on the overheard conversation, a defense attorney would argue it was hearsay or miscommunication, and without recorded evidence or physical proof of preparation, they might beat the charges entirely. If we let the plan proceed with full FBI coordination, we'd catch them red-handed attempting felony kidnapping with premeditation, conspiracy, and drugging charges that carried decades in prison. The legal case would be airtight, but the emotional cost was asking me to send my daughter to daycare with a woman who planned to kidnap her, to pretend everything was normal for 6 more days, to trust that law enforcement would protect Emma when the moment came. I felt like I was being asked to choose between being a good mother and being an effective crime victim, and the choice was agonizing. I looked at Agent Williams and asked him to promise me that Emma would be safe, that if anything went wrong, they'd intervene immediately. He met my eyes and said he had a daughter himself, that he'd never let a child be harmed in an operation he was running, that he gave me his word. I agreed to their plan but insisted on additional safety measures. I wanted Emma wearing a GPS tracker disguised as a bracelet or necklace, something Mei Lin wouldn't recognize as surveillance technology. I wanted my house equipped with hidden cameras that would document everything Mei Lin did when she thought she had privacy. I wanted a direct panic button I could press if anything felt wrong before Thursday. Agent Williams and Agent Nakamura agreed to all of it immediately, saying they'd have technical teams install everything within 24 hours. They asked me to maintain completely normal behavior, keep Emma's routine unchanged, not give Mei Lin any reason for suspicion. Agent Nakamura asked if Emma had any food allergies or medical conditions they should be aware of in case they needed to intervene while Mei Lin was feeding her the sedatives. I said Emma was healthy with no allergies, but the thought of Mei Lin drugging my 4-year-old daughter made me want to vomit. Agent Williams told me to channel my rage into patience and focus, that we'd have justice if I could hold together for less than a week. Victoria said she'd be on call 24/7 and to contact her immediately if anything changed or felt wrong. We left the FBI office and I drove home in a daze, my brain racing through everything that could go wrong. When I got back to my house, Mei Lin and Emma were in the playroom doing art projects exactly as planned. Emma ran to hug me, her small hands covered in washable paint, her face bright with excitement as she showed me the rainbow she'd painted. Mei Lin smiled and said Emma had been wonderfully creative and well-behaved, that they'd had a lovely afternoon. I hugged my daughter and tried to memorize everything about this moment, the weight of her in my arms, her shampoo smell, the sound of her laughter. This was what Mei Lin wanted to destroy. This innocent joy and trust. For money. I helped Emma clean up while Mei Lin started preparing dinner, and I forced myself to make conversation about the evening routine and weekend plans. Mei Lin said she was happy to work Saturday if I needed her, that she had no special plans. I said that would be wonderful, trying to sound grateful rather than disgusted. We had dinner together, the 3 of us eating at the kitchen table while Emma chattered about her day. Mei Lin fed Emma bites of vegetables and wiped her face and asked her to use good manners. It was a perfect imitation of caring, and I wondered again how someone performed love while planning violence. The FBI technical team arrived at 11 that night after Mei Lin had left, and Emma was deeply asleep. 2 agents came in an unmarked van and spent 4 hours installing hidden cameras throughout my house, positioning them in the kitchen, living room, Emma's bedroom, and the main hallways. They installed audio recording devices that would capture every conversation in Mandarin or English. They gave me a GPS tracker disguised as a children's smartwatch that looked like a toy, but transmitted Emma's location constantly. They showed me how to activate a panic button on my phone that would immediately alert every agent on the case. They explained that starting tomorrow, there would be FBI surveillance on my house at all times, agents positioned in unmarked vehicles on my street who would document Maylin's movements and behaviors. If she did anything suspicious before Thursday, they'd know immediately. If Wei came to the house to case it in advance, they'd identify and follow her. I thanked them and tried to sleep but spent most of the night lying awake, staring at my ceiling, thinking about all the ways this could go horribly wrong. What if Maylin noticed the cameras? What if she changed the plan? What if Wei convinced her to move the date up? What if Emma got scared or hurt during the intervention? The what-ifs spiraled endlessly until my alarm went off at 6, and I had to force myself out of bed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Saturday morning, Maylin arrived at 8 to help with Emma's care while I supposedly caught up on work. She made pancakes for breakfast and played games with Emma in the living room while I sat in my office pretending to review documents but actually watching FBI surveillance footage on my laptop that Agent Williams had given me secure access to. I could see every room in my house from multiple angles, could hear every conversation in real time. Maylin called Wei around 10 in the morning and they spoke in Mandarin about final preparations for Thursday. Wei said she'd rented a van using a fake name and ID, that she'd secured the apartment where they'd keep Emma during the ransom negotiations. Maylin confirmed my conference schedule and said everything was proceeding perfectly. I watched her face on camera as she described drugging Emma, and her expression was calm and businesslike, no hint of remorse or hesitation. After the call ended, Maylin immediately returned to playing blocks with Emma, her demeanor warm and affectionate. The dissonance was maddening. Agent Williams texted me that they'd traced Wei's location to an apartment complex in a neighboring state, had identified the van rental using security footage from the rental company, and were building comprehensive files on both women. The evidence against them was accumulating rapidly, and the case would be prosecutable even if something prevented the Thursday kidnapping attempt from proceeding. Monday morning, I went to my actual office for a few hours to maintain routine and handle work I'd been neglecting. My colleagues noticed I seemed distracted and asked if everything was okay. I said Emma had been having trouble sleeping and I was worried about her, which wasn't a complete lie. I couldn't tell anyone what was really happening because Agent Williams had been clear that operational security required absolute confidentiality. Even my mother couldn't know, though she called that afternoon asking about Emma and whether we'd like to visit next weekend. I said we'd try to make it work and deflected her questions about whether something was bothering me. My mother had always been perceptive, one of those immigrant mothers who could read emotional states in her children's voices even through phone lines. She said I sounded stressed and offered to come stay with us if I needed help with childcare. I told her Maylin was working out wonderfully, and I didn't need additional help, and the words tasted bitter because I was lying to protect her from worry. My mother said to call if anything changed, that she'd always be there when I needed her. I thanked her and ended the call before my voice could break. Wednesday evening, Maylin asked if I was excited about the conference tomorrow, whether I'd be networking with potential new clients. I said yes, that it was an important opportunity for the firm, and I was looking forward to the presentations. She asked what time I'd be leaving in the morning, and I confirmed 7, that I'd already arranged for Emma's breakfast and had packed my conference materials. Maylin said she'd arrive at 6:30 to make sure Emma was settled before I left, that I shouldn't worry about anything at home. I thanked her and said I appreciated her reliability, choking on the words. After she left that evening, Agent Williams called to confirm positioning for tomorrow. He said they'd have agents in place by 6, that everyone involved understood this was an active kidnapping interdiction with a child victim, and no mistakes would be tolerated. He said Agent Nakamura would be in an FBI van 3 houses down with full surveillance and communication capability. He himself would be positioned in a car across the street dressed as a utility worker. 4 additional agents would be staged at various points around my neighborhood with rapid response capability. The moment Maylin attempted to take Emma out of the house with sedatives in her system, they'd move in for arrests. I asked again what would happen if Emma got scared or confused during the takedown. Agent Williams said they'd trained for this scenario, that Agent Nakamura spoke Mandarin and could communicate with both Emma and Maylin, that they'd prioritize Emma's emotional well-being throughout the operation. Thursday morning arrived with perfect weather, sunny and mild. I dressed for my fake conference in business attire and went through the motions of preparing to leave. Maylin arrived exactly at 6:30 as promised, cheerful and helpful, making Emma's breakfast while I gathered my materials. Emma was still sleepy, rubbing her eyes and asking why Mommy was leaving so early. I hugged her and said I had an important work event but I'd be home for dinner, that she should have a fun day with Auntie May. Emma nodded and went back to eating her cereal while Maylin chatted about the activities they'd do today. I kissed Emma's forehead and told her I loved her, holding on maybe a second too long before forcing myself to let go. I walked to my car with my briefcase and laptop bag, waving goodbye to Emma who was watching through the kitchen window. I drove exactly 2 blocks, then pulled into the parking lot of a closed business where Agent Williams was waiting in an unmarked FBI vehicle. I climbed into the back seat and he handed me a tablet showing live feeds from all the cameras in my house. He said we'd watch together, that I'd be able to intervene immediately if needed. We waited. Maylin finished feeding Emma breakfast and cleaned the kitchen, then announced it was time for some quiet playtime since Emma seemed tired. She took Emma upstairs to her bedroom and pulled out a children's vitamin bottle from her purse. I watched on camera as she crushed 2 pills and mixed them into a juice box, telling Emma in English that Auntie May had brought her a special treat. Emma drank the juice happily, trusting the woman who'd cared for her for 8 months. Within 15 minutes, Emma's movements became slower, her eyelids drooping. Maylin encouraged her to lie down on her bed, said she needed a little rest. Emma complied without resistance, already sedated. I was shaking with rage watching this woman drug my daughter, and Agent Williams put a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady and calm. We have her. Emma is safe. Watch. Maylin waited another 10 minutes to ensure Emma was deeply unconscious, then picked her up and carried her downstairs. She'd packed a diaper bag with Emma's things, making it look like a normal outing. She texted Wei that they were ready to go, that she'd meet her at the planned location in 20 minutes. Maylin carried Emma toward the front door, reaching for the doorknob with her free hand. The moment she turned the handle and stepped onto the front porch, FBI agents appeared from multiple directions with weapons drawn, shouting commands in English and Mandarin. FBI, put the child down! Get on the ground! Maylin froze in shock, her face going white, still holding Emma's limp body. Agent Nakamura approached with her hands visible, speaking in calm Mandarin, instructing Maylin to gently set Emma on the porch and step back with her hands raised. Maylin complied, carefully laying Emma on the porch surface before backing away with trembling hands raised. Agents immediately moved in, one checking Emma's vital signs while others cuffed Maylin and read her rights in both English and Mandarin. Simultaneously, agents at Wei's apartment complex were executing a coordinated arrest. Agent Williams received confirmation through his radio that Wei was in custody, that she'd been caught in the rented van filled with supplies for holding a kidnapped child, including additional sedatives, restraints, and communication equipment for sending ransom demands. Both women were being taken into federal custody on charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, drugging a minor, and interstate criminal activity. I ran from the FBI vehicle to my house, my heels clicking on the pavement, my breath coming in gasps. An EMT was already examining Emma on my front porch, checking her pulse and breathing, shining lights in her eyes. He said she'd been given a significant dose of benzodiazepines but was medically stable, that she'd likely sleep for several more hours and wake up confused but unharmed. He recommended taking her to the hospital for observation and full toxicology screening. I scooped Emma into my arms and held her against my chest, feeling her shallow breathing, her warm weight, her absolute vulnerability. Agent Williams came over and said an ambulance was standing by if I wanted to ride with Emma to the hospital, that they'd need to interview me again once I was ready, but Emma's health was the priority now. I nodded mutely and climbed into the ambulance, never letting go of my daughter. The hospital was 8 minutes away and doctors were waiting when we arrived, immediately taking Emma to a pediatric examination room and starting IV fluids to help flush the sedatives from her system. They said she'd likely sleep through most of the day but would recover completely, that there would be no lasting physical damage from the drugs Maylin had administered. I sat in a chair beside Emma's hospital bed and watched her sleep, her small chest rising and falling with steady breaths, her face peaceful and innocent. She had no idea what had almost happened to her, what horror she'd been spared. Victoria arrived at the hospital within an hour, having been notified by Agent Williams. She sat with me and held my hand while I finally broke down crying, all the fear and rage I'd been containing for a week pouring out in wrenching sobs. Victoria said I'd been incredibly strong, that I'd protected Emma by trusting law enforcement and staying strategic rather than emotional. She said the FBI had both women in custody with overwhelming evidence against them, including surveillance footage, recorded phone conversations, physical evidence of drugging, and testimony from multiple agents who'd witnessed the attempted kidnapping. The federal prosecutor was already reviewing charges and expected to seek maximum sentences given the premeditation and vulnerability of the victim. Both women faced 20 to 30 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. Victoria said we'd likely face civil litigation from them claiming entrapment or illegal surveillance, but those defenses had no merit given the circumstances. The law was entirely on our side. Emma woke up around 5 that evening, confused and groggy, asking why she was in a hospital. I told her she'd gotten sick and the doctors wanted to make sure she was okay, that Mommy was here and she was safe. Emma asked where Auntie May was and I said Auntie May had to go away, that she wouldn't be coming back. Emma started crying, saying she missed Auntie May, that she wanted her to come read bedtime stories. I held Emma and let her cry while my own heart broke, knowing my daughter's trust had been violated in ways she was too young to understand. The pediatrician said Emma's emotional reaction was normal, that children Emma's age formed attachments to caregivers and didn't understand adult betrayals. She recommended child therapy to help Emma process the disruption and potential confusion as she got older and learned what had really happened. I agreed immediately, wanting every resource available to help Emma recover from this trauma she didn't even fully comprehend. We were discharged from the hospital that evening and I took Emma home, sleeping in her room that night to reassure her and myself that she was safe. The criminal case moved quickly. The federal prosecutor assigned was a woman named Diana Roth who specialized in kidnapping and child endangerment cases. She met with me at my home 3 days after the arrests and explained the prosecution strategy. They were charging both Mei Lin and Wei with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, drugging a minor, interstate criminal activity, and organized fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, including recorded phone conversations in Mandarin that had been translated by certified translators, surveillance footage showing Mei Lin drugging Emma and attempting to remove her from the house, text messages between the two women coordinating the crime, financial records showing they'd purchased sedatives and rented the van and apartment specifically for kidnapping purposes, and testimony from multiple FBI agents who'd witnessed the crime in progress. Diana said both women's court-appointed attorneys were already discussing plea deals because the evidence made trial virtually unwinnable. Mei Lin was facing 25 years minimum, Wei 20 years. Diana wanted my input on whether I'd accept plea deals or preferred to force a trial where I'd have to testify, and Emma might eventually have to understand the full scope of what happened. I asked what justice looked like in each scenario. Diana said plea deals would guarantee significant prison time without the trauma and uncertainty of trial, while trial convictions might yield longer sentences but required reliving everything publicly and risking acquittal if something went wrong procedurally. I chose plea deals with mandatory minimum sentences, wanting certainty over revenge. Diana negotiated agreements where Mei Lin would plead guilty to all charges and accept 25 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility for 20 years. Wei would accept 22 years with no parole eligibility for 18 years. Both women would be required to cooperate with ongoing FBI investigations into whether they were part of larger kidnapping networks targeting wealthy families. Both would be deported to China upon completion of their sentences. The plea agreements were finalized 6 weeks after the arrests, and I attended the court hearing where both women formally entered their guilty pleas. Mei Lin looked older and broken, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. When the judge asked if she understood she was pleading guilty to attempting to kidnap a 4-year-old child she'd been trusted to care for, Mei Lin said yes in a voice barely above a whisper. Wei showed more defiance, insisting she'd been manipulated by her sister and deserved leniency. The judge showed no sympathy, noting that purchasing sedatives and renting kidnapping locations demonstrated clear premeditation and active participation. Both women were sentenced immediately and led away in shackles to begin their federal prison terms. The FBI investigation revealed that Mei Lin and Wei weren't part of a larger organized ring, but their case prompted widespread review of nanny placement agencies and background check procedures. The agency that had placed Mei Lin with my family faced civil litigation for negligent vetting, having failed to discover that Mei Lin's references were fabricated and her background check had been superficial. The agency settled for an undisclosed amount that I donated entirely to organizations supporting kidnapping prevention and victim advocacy. I testified at state legislative hearings about strengthening childcare worker screening requirements and creating mandatory reporting systems for suspicious behavior. My experience became a case study in childcare security, and I spoke at parenting conferences about trusting instincts and maintaining language connections across generations. Several mothers contacted me privately to say they'd discovered similar situations with caregivers after becoming more vigilant about monitoring and understanding conversations they weren't supposed to comprehend. The ripple effects of one prevented kidnapping extended further than I'd imagined possible, creating systemic changes that might protect other children from similar predators. Emma adjusted slowly to life without Mei Lin, initially asking about her frequently before gradually accepting her absence. We hired a new nanny through a different agency with far more rigorous vetting, a woman named Helen Garcia who came with law enforcement background checks and impeccable verifiable references. Helen was patient and kind with Emma, never trying to replace Mei Lin but creating her own relationship built on earned trust rather than assumed safety. I reduced my work hours and spent more time with Emma directly, realizing that my career ambitions had made me vulnerable to someone I'd trusted too easily. Emma started therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in early trauma and slowly began processing what had happened in age-appropriate ways. By the time Emma was 6, she understood that Auntie Mei had tried to take her away from Mommy and had gone to prison for doing something very wrong. She understood that not all adults were safe, that trusting someone required time and evidence, that Mommy had protected her by understanding a language she didn't know I spoke. Emma asked if I'd teach her Mandarin, and I said yes, beginning the same language lessons my mother had insisted on with me decades earlier. The language that had saved Emma's life would now become part of her own toolkit for navigating a complex world where dangers often hid behind friendly faces. 5 years after the kidnapping attempt, I received a letter from Mei Lin in federal prison. She'd written through the prison system, and I almost threw it away unread before curiosity won. The letter was in Mandarin, translated by prison staff for official records, apologizing for what she'd tried to do. She claimed desperation had driven her to consider unthinkable actions, that financial pressure and family obligations in China had made her feel like kidnapping was her only option for survival. She asked if I could ever forgive her, said she thought about Emma constantly, and hoped she was healthy and happy. The letter felt hollow and self-serving, framing her choices as inevitable rather than evil, refusing to fully own the magnitude of what she'd attempted. I never responded because Mei Lin deserved nothing from me, not forgiveness or acknowledgement or absolution for traumatizing my daughter and violating our trust so profoundly. She'd spend the next 15 years in prison with nothing but time to reflect on choices she'd made, and that felt like appropriate consequence for someone who'd planned to destroy a family for money. Emma, now 9, asks occasionally what happened to Auntie Mei, and I tell her the truth in age-appropriate language. Sometimes people make terrible choices and face serious consequences, and that's how justice works. My daughter understands in ways most children don't that safety isn't guaranteed, that vigilance matters, that the language connecting us to our heritage saved her life when appearance-based assumptions made criminals careless. That's a legacy I'll carry forward, teaching Emma and eventually her children that cultural maintenance isn't just about identity, it's about survival and power and recognizing threats others assume you can't understand. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.